A rock split her knuckles open on a Tuesday morning, and she kept walking. That's the thing about Maggie Calloway. 3 years of cruelty, and she never stopped walking. Her husband was hanged for stealing horses. The town of Harlan's Crossing buried him and then spent 3 years trying to bury her. They called her cursed. They threw rocks. They burned her out. They forged letters in dead men's names. And still she walked. She didn't know that a scarred rancher named Eli Hargrove was watching from across the street that Tuesday morning. She didn't know he'd been watching for weeks, noticing things nobody else bothered to notice. She didn't know that his decision to step through a doorway and say 2 words enough and stop would change both their lives forever. If you've ever been knocked down by people who were supposed to be your neighbors, if you've ever kept walking when everything in you wanted to stop, this story is for you. Stay until the end. The truth about why Daniel Calloway stole those horses will break your heart open and put it back together again. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment, and tell me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. He died running toward you, not away. The truth that finally freed the widow. They tried to bury the dust of Harlan's Crossing had a particular quality in August. It didn't settle. It hung in the air like a judgment, coating everything it touched: the storefronts, the horses at the hitching posts, the woman walking down the center of Main Street with blood running from her right hand. Margaret Calloway didn't look at the boy who had thrown the rock. She didn't look at the women on the mercantile porch who had seen it happen and said nothing. She kept her chin level, her shoulders as straight as 3 years of hunger would allow, and she walked toward the general store the way a person walks when they have long since stopped expecting mercy from the world around them. She needed thread. She needed bandages. She had 43 cents. The rock had caught her across 3 knuckles, the second one this week, the same boy, the same stretch of road. He was 11 years old, and he had learned cruelty the way children learn everything, by watching the adults around him practice it without consequence. On the opposite side of the street, half hidden in the shadow of the livery stable doorway, a man watched her walk. Eli Hargrove had been in Harlan's Crossing since before dawn, waiting on a farrier who was running 2 hours late. He'd seen the boy wind up. He'd seen the rock leave the boy's hand. He'd been too far across the street, moving too late. And by the time he'd taken 3 steps, the rock had already done its work, and the boy had already run. He stood in the livery doorway and watched Maggie Calloway walk through her own blood into the general store, and something that had been calcifying in his chest for 13 years shifted just slightly, like a stone finding a new resting place. He didn't go in right away. That wasn't his way. He watched. He waited. He thought about what he'd seen in this town over 5 years of twice-monthly supply runs, the way people moved around this particular woman like she carried something contagious, the way eyes cut toward her, and away again, the particular silence that fell in a room when she entered it. He'd noticed the bandage on her left hand 2 weeks ago. He'd noticed the thinness of her, not slender, but hollowed, the kind of thin that came from months of not eating enough. He'd noticed that she always sat with her back to the wall when she ate at the diner the one time he'd seen her there. He'd noticed all of it because noticing things was what he had always done, even when he wished he could stop. He noticed, and he said nothing. He told himself it wasn't his business. He was still telling himself that when he heard Vivian Ashford's voice carry through the propped open door of the general store, bright and sweet and sharp as a straight razor wrapped in silk. Well, well, look what walked in off the street. Eli Hargrove crossed Main Street in 12 strides. The bell above the door was still ringing when he stepped inside. The general store smelled like tobacco, dried lavender, and axle grease. It was a Tuesday morning in August, which meant it should have been quiet. It wasn't. Every person in the store had gone absolutely still, the way small animals go still when a predator moves through tall grass. Vivian Ashford stood near the fabric bolts in a dress the color of a summer peach, her golden hair pinned in perfect curls beneath a hat that cost more than most families in Harlan's Crossing spent on food in a month. She was 26 years old and beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, carefully maintained, designed to be looked at, devastating in the right light. She was circling Maggie Calloway the way a cat circles something it has already broken. Dripping blood on Mr. Aldrich's clean floor, Vivian said, fanning herself with the slow rhythm of practiced boredom. Did someone finally give you what you deserve? Two women behind her, Clara Marsh and Bette Holloway. Vivian's constant shadows giggled behind their hands. Maggie said nothing. She reached for a spool of thread with her good hand, her eyes forward, her face carefully expressionless. She had the particular stillness of a person who has learned that reacting gives her tormentors what they want. You know what I heard? Vivian stepped closer, lowering her voice to a carrying whisper that everyone in the store could hear perfectly. I heard Daniel didn't steal those horses because he was desperate. I heard he stole them because he was planning to run. I heard he couldn't bear the thought of spending another night under the same roof as. That's enough. The voice came from the doorway. Two words, low, flat, and cold as river water in November. Every head turned. Eli Hargrove filled the doorframe the way a mountain fills a horizon, not by being dramatic about it, but simply by being too large to ignore. 6 feet 3 inches shoulders built by 15 years of ranch work, a jaw like quarried granite, and eyes the color of aged whiskey that currently held all the warmth of a drawn weapon. He wore his sleeves rolled down to the wrist, despite the August heat. He always did. He had come to Harlan's Crossing twice a month for 5 years. In that time, he had spoken by his own rough estimation perhaps 300 words in public. He'd bought supplies, settled accounts, and ridden back out to his land in the hills. And the town had left him alone because something about Eli Hargrove suggested very strongly that being left alone was what he preferred. He had never in 5 years spoken to a woman in the middle of a public scene. The store held its breath. Vivian turned slowly. Her expression rearranged itself in the time it took her to complete the turn, the cruelty tucking itself away, replaced by something softer, something practiced. Her fan began to move in that particular rhythm. Mr. Hargrove, her voice went warm as fresh bread. What a coincidence, I know what you were doing. His eyes didn't move to her face when she spoke. They stayed on Maggie's hand, on the blood running down her fingers and dripping onto the floorboards. I've been watching you do it for 5 years, watching you make sport of people you've decided are beneath you. He paused. I understand exactly what kind of woman she is, and I understand exactly what kind you are. The fan stopped moving. Vivian Ashford was not accustomed to being looked through. She was not accustomed to being spoken to as though she were furniture. The color that rose in her cheeks was not flattering. Mr. Hargrove, I must insist that you don't understand the situation. This woman's husband made his own choices and paid for them. That's got nothing to do with her. He walked past Vivian without looking at her again, walked past her the way you walk past a post in the road, and stopped in front of Maggie. She looked up. She had to look way up. He was nearly a foot taller. Her eyes were gray-blue, the color of storm clouds over flat water. They were wary and exhausted, and underneath the exhaustion there was something else. Something that hadn't been fully extinguished. He filed that away. Let me see it. It's nothing. It's not nothing. Let me see it. A beat. Then she held out her hand. The rock had torn the skin across 3 knuckles, ugly, already swelling, the kind of wound that would stiffen by morning if it wasn't tended properly. Eli reached into his coat pocket, produced a clean white handkerchief, and wrapped it around her hand without asking permission. Hold that tight. He turned to Owen Aldrich behind the counter. The store owner had been watching from behind the register with the expression of a man trying very hard to be invisible. Bandages. Now. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. Aldrich disappeared into the back. Eli looked back at Vivian. She hadn't moved. Her face was the color of a sunset before a bad storm. We're done here, he said. Mr. Hargrove. Her voice was strained to its breaking point. I really must ask you to reconsider your position. You don't know this woman's history. You don't know what her husband. I know everything I need to know. He held her gaze for 3 more seconds, long enough to make his meaning clear, then turned back to Maggie. Outside, better light. The porch was blazing and shadeless. Eli led her to the bench by the water trough and sat her down with more care than she'd expected from hands that size. He crouched in front of her, unwrapped the handkerchief, examined the wound. Same boy as last week. She went still. How did you know about last week? I noticed things. He took the bandages Aldrich had brought out and began to work. His hands were steady and surprisingly gentle. I notice a lot of things. Why? He finished tying the bandage and looked up at her. Their eyes met at close range, his amber, hers storm gray. She didn't look away, which was unusual. Most people looked away from Eli Hargrove eventually. Something about the stillness of him made people uncomfortable. Because nobody else does, he said. He stood, dusted his knees. Change it tonight. Keep it clean. She looked at the bandage, then at him. He was already turning to leave. Wait, he stopped. I don't even know your name. Your actual name. Eli. He looked back. Eli Hargrove. I'm Maggie. She said it quietly as though testing the shape of it. Not Mrs. Calloway, not that cursed woman. Just Maggie. Why did you do that in there? He was quiet for a moment. Then instead of answering, he pushed up his left sleeve. Maggie's breath caught. The scars ran from his wrist to above his elbow and beyond burn. Scars old and fully healed, ridged and puckered shiny in the sunlight, a landscape of old catastrophe mapped onto skin. They were not small. They were not subtle. They were the kind of scars that told a story without any words. 13 years ago, he said. Union cavalry, camp outside Atlanta. Fire broke out in the night and the whole camp went up in 20 minutes. His thumb moved along one ridge of scar tissue, not quite touching it. I got out. Most of my unit didn't. There was a boy, Jesse, 17. He'd lied about his age to enlist. He called me his sergeant, his hero. A pause. When I heard him screaming, I went back in. My arms caught fire, getting him out. She didn't look away. Not from the scars, not from his face. And Jesse, he was already dead when I got to him. The smoke had taken him before the flames reached him. His voice was level, careful. I carried him out anyway. Burned myself half to death for a corpse. And then I sat on the grass and watched 22 other men die because I wasn't fast enough. That wasn't your fault. That's what people say. I say it because it's true. He studied her for a long moment. Everyone in this town has theories about these scars. Some say I'm a war hero. Some say I started the fire myself. Nobody asks. They see what they've already decided to see. He pulled his sleeve back down. You didn't flinch. Why would I flinch? Most people do. Most people are fools. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't quite a smile. It was the ghost of one, the suggestion of a capacity for it. I've got a ranch, he said. Big place. 6 hands who tear through clothes faster than any reasonable men have a right to. I need someone to handle the mending. Room and board included. Private quarters. Fair wages. Maggie's heart did something complicated. You're offering me work. I'm offering you a job. There's a difference. Why me? You could hire anyone. I don't want anyone. He met her eyes. I want someone who understands what it's like to be judged for things that aren't their fault. She was quiet a long moment, looking at the strange, scarred, silent man who had walked into a store and said 2 words on her behalf when no one had said anything in 3 years. If I come to your ranch, she said carefully, what will people say? Do you care? She thought about it honestly. I've been trying not to. Good. He tipped his hat. I'll be in town day after tomorrow. Noon. If you want the work, be here. He walked to his horse mounted in one fluid motion. Hargrove. The ranch is in the hills north of the Penley Road. Ask anyone. He rode out without looking back. Maggie sat on the bench and watched the dust settle where he'd been. The sun hammered the top of her head. The bandage on her hand was white and clean and tight-tied with a precise small knot. When was the last time someone had touched her with care? She thought about Daniel, the way he'd held her hand when her mother was dying, the way he'd smiled at her over the breakfast table as though she were something remarkable, the way his face had looked the morning they led him away. He'd made a terrible mistake, but he'd loved her. She had never stopped believing that. She sat for a long time. Then she got up and walked back to her room behind the livery stable to do what she always did, make do with what she had. She would think about Eli Hargrove's offer tonight. Inside the general store, Vivian Ashford had watched all of it through the window. The bandaging, the conversation she couldn't hear, the way Eli Hargrove had crouched in the dirt in front of that skinny, ragged woman and wrapped her hand like she was made of something worth protecting. Vivian's nails dug into the windowsill. Clara, her voice was honeyed arsenic. Go find my father. Tell him I need to speak with him immediately. Clara went. Vivian smoothed her skirt, touched her hair. composed her face into its most pleasant arrangement. Inside, behind the pleasantness, something hot and coiled tightened further. She had been working toward Eli Hargrove for 4 years. Not because she loved him, Vivian Ashford had not yet met anyone she considered worth the inconvenience of love, but because her father had told her quietly and clearly that the Hargrove land was the most valuable piece of untitled territory in 3 counties, and that whoever controlled that land controlled the future of Harlan's Crossing. And Vivian intended to control the future of everything she could reach. She had been patient. She had been strategic. She had been everything her father had taught her to be. And now this. A cursed widow with blood on her knuckles and a $2 room behind a livery stable in Eli Hargrove, looking at her like she was the only real thing in the room. Vivian walked to the writing desk in the back of her father's office when she got home that afternoon. She sat for a long time thinking. Then she pulled out a paper, dipped her pen, and wrote 2 letters. The first was to Cole Renfrew in El Paso. Renfrew had worked for Hargrove 2 years ago, had been caught stealing, had been fired and shot in the shoulder for drawing on his employer afterward. He had sworn to make Hargrove pay. Men who swore things like that, in Vivian's experience, were reliable if you handled them properly. She told him that Eli Hargrove had developed a weakness. A woman. She told him the name, the description, the precise situation. She told him the ranch layout as best she knew it. She did not tell him about the second letter. The second letter went to a man in Abilene who had acquired through means that would not bear examination a geological survey of land in the Harlan's Crossing Hills. The survey contained information that would be of significant interest to anyone with capital to invest or to anyone planning to take that land by force. Vivian folded both letters, sealed both envelopes, and handed them to the courier before supper. She was nothing if not thorough. That night, Maggie sat on her narrow bed and looked at the bandage on her hand. The room behind the livery stable was smaller than most horse stalls. A bed, a washstand, a window that had never closed properly, a door with a latch that anyone with a determined shoulder could open. She had $1.87 to her name after today's purchases. She had 3 dresses, 2 of which were becoming unwearable at the seams. She had a sewing kit she'd kept through everything, the only thing of value she still possessed, the thing that had kept her in bread money when nothing else would. She thought about tomorrow. She thought about day after tomorrow. She lay down and looked at the ceiling and listened to the horses shift in the stalls next door, and she thought about what it would mean to say yes. A bed with a lock on the door, work she was actually good at, a place where the people didn't already know her story. The possibility of it was so large, she was almost afraid to hold it. She was still awake at midnight when she heard footsteps outside, then smelled the smoke. She threw on her dress and ran. Not her room, the ring of burning brush surrounding it deliberately placed a circle of fire designed to fill her small space with smoke and fear without actually burning her alive. Calculated cruelty. The message written in flame rather than rock, you are surrounded and we can reach you anywhere. She stumbled out, coughing, eyes streaming, and turned to face the 3 men in the shadows. She recognized the boots on the one in the center before she recognized anything else. She had seen those boots walk across the bank lobby floor 100 times in 3 years, had marked them the way you mark all the shoes of people who hold power over your circumstances. Walter Ashford's boots, hand-stitched Spanish leather, a very particular style of heel. You've been told to leave town. The voice was muffled by the bandana, but she knew it. She had always known it. Politely, then firmly. Now you're being told with fire. Maggie's throat was raw from the smoke. Her eyes were streaming. She stood in her nightdress in the dirt and faced the man who ran her town and tried to remember that she was not going to beg. What do you want? Stay away from Eli Hargrove. The voice was patient, reasonable. The voice of a man who considered himself to be doing her a favor by giving her another warning rather than simply letting the fire spread. Don't go to that ranch. Don't see him again. That's all. Or, he stepped closer. She could smell the whiskey through the bandana. Or next time the fire isn't outside. They were gone before the smoke cleared. Maggie stood in the circle of burning brush as it burned down to cinders. Everything she owned was gritty with ash and smelled of smoke. The window she could never close was gray with it. The dress she'd just thrown on would need to be washed twice to get the smell out. She stood there for a long time. She thought about running. She thought about taking her $1.87 and her sewing kit and walking until she found somewhere else to be invisible. She thought about all the sensible things a woman in her position might do when a powerful man threatened her with fire. Then she thought about Eli Hargrove's hands, the scars on them, the patience with which he'd tied the bandage. She thought about his voice. I notice things because nobody else does. And she thought about Daniel, about the morning they'd taken him away, about the last look he'd given her across the crowd, not frightened, not ashamed, apologetic, as though the thing he was most sorry about was leaving her behind. She had not let herself think about that look in 3 years because it was too much to hold. She thought about it now, standing in the ashes of Ashford's warning, and she understood something that had been waiting to be understood for a long time. Daniel had never looked at her like a man who wanted to escape. He had looked at her like a man who was desperate to provide. But that was something she couldn't untangle tonight. Tonight she needed to act. Maggie Calloway walked back through the smoke. She gathered what hadn't been ruined: her sewing kit, her second-best dress, the small photograph of her mother. She wrapped it all in a shawl and sat down in the doorway to wait for dawn. She was done asking the people of Harlan's Crossing for permission to exist.
Whoa.
She was on the bench outside the general store when the sun came up, face streaked with ash, dress smelling like charred wood bundle in her lap. She sat there as the town woke around her, as shutters opened and merchants swept their porches, as the boy who had thrown the rocks on 2 consecutive Tuesdays walked past with his mother, both of them giving her a wide berth, as the women who never spoke to her spoke around her just loud enough to be heard, sitting there like she owns it. No shame at all. That's what cursed women do. They attach themselves to good men and drag them down. Maggie sat. She had nowhere else to be. She had nowhere else, period. And that she thought was a kind of freedom she hadn't noticed before. When you have nothing left to lose, the threats of people with something to protect stop meaning very much. At 2 minutes past noon, she heard hoofbeats. Eli Hargrove came down Main Street on his chestnut mare with a wagon behind him, driven by an older man with a gray beard and the expression of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by anything. The whole street stopped what it was doing. Eli pulled up in front of the bench and looked down at her, at the ash on her face, the smoke smell, the bundle on her lap, and his expression went through several things very quickly before settling into something carefully neutral. He swung down, crouched in front of her so they were eye-level. You're early. Didn't have anywhere else to be. She met his eyes. Someone burned me out last night. 3 men. I recognize one of them. He told me to stay away from you. His jaw tightened. Who? Doesn't matter right now. What matters is I'm still here. She held his gaze. I've been called cursed for 3 years. Been hit with rocks, spit on, threatened, and now burned out. If you still want to hire me, knowing that trouble follows me, I'll work harder than anyone you've ever had. But if you've changed your mind, I understand. You don't owe me anything. He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that actually sees. Then he stood and held out his hand. Wagon's waiting, he said. Let's go. She took his hand. It was rough and warm and solid. He pulled her to her feet. The whole street was watching. Vivian Ashford stood on the bank steps in her summer peach dress, face white fan, motionless for the first time Maggie had ever seen. Owen Aldrich gaped from his doorway. Clara and Bet stood frozen, whispering behind their hands. Eli helped Maggie into the wagon, climbed up beside her. Dutch, he said to the driver, move. The wagon lurched forward. Maggie didn't look back. She looked at the road winding into the hills, at the sky above it, at the unknown thing she was heading toward. She did not feel hope. That seemed too large. She felt something smaller and sturdier, a kind of stubborn forward motion, a refusal to stop. Beside her, Eli sat in silence. His scarred arm brushed against hers as the wagon bounced over a rut in the road. Neither of them moved away from the contact. She didn't know that Vivian's letters were already in 2 separate courier pouches heading south. She didn't know that Cole Renfrew would read his in 3 days and begin packing. She didn't know that the second letter, the one about the land, would change everything about why the danger was coming. She only knew that the town of Harlan's Crossing was disappearing behind the first hill, and for the first time in 3 years, she was facing away from it. The Hargrove Ranch appeared in the valley below the North Ridge, like something out of a story about the kind of life other people lived. A main house built from heavy timber, solid as the hills behind it. A bunkhouse. A barn twice the size of any building in Harlan's Crossing. Corrals full of horses in motion, quarter horses, working horses, animals bred for use rather than show. And beyond the corrals covering the hills in every direction, cattle. Hundreds of them. The landscape itself seemed to belong to this place rather than the other way around. You own all of this, Maggie said. Every acre. Eli looked at it with the expression of a man who has built something and still hasn't entirely gotten used to it. It's big. It's extraordinary. It's lonely, he said it matter-of-factly without self-pity. Has been for a long time. The wagon pulled up to the main house and the bunkhouse door opened and 6 men emerged into the afternoon heat to take stock of whatever their employer had brought home with him this time. They were cowboys, sunburned dusty, with the careful evaluating eyes of men who lived by their ability to read situations quickly. They looked at Maggie the way you look at a coyote that has wandered into the henhouse, not immediately hostile but not welcoming either, waiting to see what the coyote would do. The tall one with the rust-colored beard stepped forward. Walt. Foreman. Eli had mentioned him. Boss, didn't know you were bringing company. Plans changed. Eli stepped down from the wagon. This is Maggie Calloway. She's the new seamstress. She'll be handling the mending going forward. A pause. You know her name? Walt's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Calloway. As in Daniel Calloway's. As in Maggie Calloway. That's the whole of it. Eli's voice was quiet, but there was iron in the quietness. Anyone has a problem with that, they can settle it with me, or they can collect their wages and ride out tonight. No hard feelings either way. Nobody moved. Good. Eli turned to help Maggie down from the wagon. His hands caught her waist, steadying no more than that, and she registered again how little she weighed, how much lighter she was than she should have been. He registered it too. She could tell by the slight tightening around his eyes. Dutch, show Mrs. Calloway to the guest cabin, the one by the creek. Dutch's eyebrows went up. Boss, that's the... I know what it is. Dutch showed her. The cabin was small and clean. One room, one bed, a table with 2 chairs, a washstand with a real mirror, and a window with a latch that actually worked, that actually closed all the way. A door with a bolt on the inside. She stood in the center of the room and looked at the bolt on the door for a long time. Dutch said supper was at 6. The boss hated late and left. Maggie set her bundle down on the table. She sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was real, not the thin ticking she'd been sleeping on for 3 years, but a real mattress stuffed thick. The quilt on top was faded but clean. She sat on that bed in her smoke-smelling dress with her $1.87 in her sewing kit and the ash still on her face, and she cried. Not quietly, not carefully. She cried the way you cry when you haven't let yourself do it in so long that the thing that comes out has been accumulating for years, building pressure behind every rock thrown and every slur muttered and every door that closed in her face. She pressed her face into the quilt and let it go, and outside the creek ran past the cabin, making its unconcerned noise, and the horses moved in the corrals, and the world kept going around her while she finally allowed herself to fall apart. She was done in 10 minutes. She washed her face at the washstand. She unpacked her bundle. She smoothed the quilt. She changed into her second dress. Then she went to supper. 6 men at a long table and 1 woman who had just cried herself out and wasn't going to show it to anyone. The food was simple: beef stew, biscuits, strong coffee, but there was a great deal of it, and the smell of it hit Maggie in the stomach like a fist. She tried not to show how hungry she was. She failed. Hungry, Walt asked. Not cruel, just observing. Yes. When's the last time you ate proper? She set down her spoon. 3 days ago, a woman gave me some bread for washing her sheets. The table went quiet. Walt looked at Eli. Eli's jaw was set. Eat as much as you want, Eli said. We have plenty. Nobody at this table goes short. I don't need, it's supper, he said. Everyone at this table earns their keep and eats their fill. That includes you. She picked up her spoon. She ate 3 bowls. Nobody said a word about it. That was in its own way the kindest thing anyone had done for her in years. After supper, Eli showed her the mending pile. It was in the corner of the main house's large front room, and it was enormous, a mountain of torn shirts, split trousers missing buttons, failed seams, and one coat that appeared to have been used as a rope at some point. She stood in front of it and felt for the first time in years something that was almost useful. The previous woman couldn't keep up with it, Eli said. Her eyes were giving out. How long has this been building? 6 months, maybe more. Maggie pulled a shirt from the pile and turned it in her hands. The seam had parted completely from armpit to hem, a clean tear easy to fix if you knew what you were doing. She examined the fabric, the weave, the way the fibers had stressed before giving way. You could learn a lot about how a person lived by the way their clothes broke. I can fix this. I can fix all of it. Give me a week. Take whatever time. I don't need time. I need good thread, a proper range of weights and needles in 3 sizes, and a thimble. Mine was in the room that got smoked out. I'll have Dutch ride to the trading post tomorrow. Not Aldrich's store. No, there's a post east of here, a man named Briggs. He's fair. She put the shirt back on the pile and looked at him. The lamplight caught the angles of his face, the shadows under his eyes, the precise way he held himself carefully, as though perpetually braced for something. She recognized the posture. She had seen it in her own mirror. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. He turned toward the door. I'll walk you back to the cabin. They went through the warm dark past the bunkhouse where lamplight leaked under the door, and she could hear the low murmur of men's voices past the corral where horses moved like dark water. The stars were beginning to come out over the hills. At the cabin door she turned. Eli. He stopped. Why are you really doing this? He was quiet for a moment, then the way he seemed to do when he was going to say something true, he went very still first. When I came back from the war, he said, I was burned broken and half out of my mind from things I'd seen that I couldn't make sense of. I came to Texas because nobody knew me here. I built this ranch because I wanted to be alone. I thought being alone was the same as being safe. A pause. I'm tired of being alone, but I'm more tired of watching good people get ground down by small ones who've been given too much power. He looked at her steadily. You're the best person I've met in 5 years, Maggie Calloway. And I'll be damned if I'm going to stand by and watch this town finish what it started. Her throat tightened. You don't know me well enough to say that. I notice things, he said. I've been noticing you for a while. He waited a moment, then turned and walked back toward the main house through the darkness. Maggie went inside. She bolted the door. She lay down on the real mattress under the faded quilt and looked at the ceiling and listened to the creak. She slept better than she had in 3 years. The first week passed the way all good weeks do in work and in the gradual accumulation of small dignities. She worked from before dawn until the light went. She was methodical and quick. Sewing was the one thing she'd never had to doubt about herself, and the mending pile shrank visibly day by day. The cowboys watched her at first the way they'd watch any unknown quantity, cautious, ready to revise their opinion in either direction. She ignored the watching and did her work. On the 3rd day, Cody came to her door. He was 17 years old, freckled with ears that stuck out at an angle that suggested the rest of him hadn't quite grown into them yet. He held a shirt in both hands like an offering and looked at the floor when he spoke. Ma'am, I tore this pretty bad. Boss said you might be able to fix it, but if you're too busy. Let me see. The shirt was catastrophic. A tear from collar to hem on the left side, 4 missing buttons, and a collar that had separated from the body of the shirt entirely. She turned it over in her hands. What happened? Cody's ears went red. Fence. Who won the fence? She almost smiled. It was the closest she'd come to it in she couldn't remember how long. Come back tomorrow morning. It'll be done. Really, Mrs. Patterson said it wasn't worth. Everything's worth saving, Maggie said, if you know how to stitch it back together. Cody grinned a big, unguarded 17-year-old grin and practically ran back to the bunkhouse. That evening at supper, Walt sat down across from her. Cody says you're fixing his shirt. I am. Mrs. Patterson said that shirt was past saving. Mrs. Patterson was wrong. Walt studied her for a moment with those careful gray eyes. You're not what I expected, he said finally. What did you expect? He was honest about it in the way of men who have decided they might as well be. Trouble, I suppose. That's what they say in town. Cursed, crazy, dangerous. He drank his coffee. Now I think the town is full of liars. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. On the 5th day, Eli came to find her in the main house where she sat surrounded by finished mending, sorted into neat piles. You've been busy. You said a week. I wanted to prove I could do it faster. He picked up a shirt from the finished pile and examined the stitching, ran his thumb along the repaired seam. She'd matched the thread weight, precisely aligned the grain of the fabric, reinforced the stress points that had caused the original failure. This is good work. I know. He set the shirt down and looked at her with something that might have been amusement. No false modesty. Modesty is a luxury I stopped being able to afford some time ago. She met his eyes. I'm good at this. It's one of the few things I know for certain. It's not the only thing. He turned toward the door. Come with me. The corral in the afternoon heat. A chestnut mare with a white blaze stood near the fence, watching their approach with the calm intelligence of a horse that has decided to extend provisional trust. Her name's Ember, Eli said. She's gentle, good for learning. Maggie looked at the horse, then at him. You're going to teach me to ride. I'm going to try. You're going to be stubborn about it for the first 3 days, and then you're going to be good at it. He said this with the easy certainty of a man who has made an accurate assessment. A woman alone on a ranch needs to know how to move around it. And if something happens, you keep saying that because it keeps being true. He met her eyes. There's a man, Cole Renfrew. He used to work here. I caught him skimming cattle money and selling to rustlers across the border. Fired him. He drew on me in the barn. I shot him through the shoulder instead of somewhere worse. He rode off swearing to make me pay. He paused. Last I heard, he was in El Paso. Men like Renfrew don't forget. You think he'll come. I think it pays to be ready if he does. She looked at Ember for a moment. The mare looked back with those long-lashed, patient eyes. Teach me, she said. He taught her. Every evening after supper, they went to the corral. He was a patient teacher, precise, not demanding, quick to correct, but never to shame. He showed her how to approach Ember without spooking her, how to saddle her, how to sit in a way that was both secure and relaxed. His hands were steady when they guided hers, and he always stepped back again as soon as the guidance was given. On the third evening of lessons, she asked about the scars. Do they hurt still? His hands stilled on the bridle he was adjusting. Sometimes, when the weather changes. When I think about it too much. And Jesse, do you still think about Jesse? Every day. He said it simply without performance. Every single day. They stood in the quiet for a moment. The horses moved in the dimming light. Somewhere in the hills, a coyote started up and then stopped. What I said that night, he said finally, about carrying Jesse out, about watching the others die. I remember. I was the sergeant. It was my job to keep them alive. His voice was controlled, but she had been listening to controlled voices for 3 years, and she heard what was underneath. I failed that job. Jesse, the others, 22 men. You went back into fire for them. I wasn't fast enough. You couldn't have been fast enough. Nobody could have been fast enough. She held his gaze. I know something about carrying blame for things that were never your fault. It hollows you out. It eats the parts of you that you need for living. She paused. You're not a man who runs Eli. You're a man who goes back even when it costs him everything. That's not failure. That's the kind of person other people pray to have beside them. He looked at her in the failing light. His eyes, she had learned, were harder to read than most amber and careful, holding much back. But something in them shifted now. You're the first person who's touched me there in 13 years, he said quietly. She realized she had reached out and placed her hand on his scarred arm. Through the sleeve, she hadn't even thought about it. Does it bother you? No. His voice was low. It doesn't bother me at all. They stood like that for a moment that lasted longer than a moment, and then Eli cleared his throat. You're still leaning too far forward in the trot, he said. We should work on that. The lesson continued, but something had shifted between them. Something neither of them named out loud. Something that lived in the inch between her hand and his arm, and in the moment he'd chosen not to step back. It was 1 week later, on a warm night after rain, that the thing between them became real. Not in the way of drama or declaration, in the way of two quiet people learning that they did not need to speak to be understood. The rain had come in the afternoon, a good soaking rain that laid the dust and brought out the smell of sage and creek water and turned the world briefly green. By evening it had passed, leaving the air clean and cool and the porch boards dark with moisture. Maggie had finished her work by lamplight and gone to stand on the bunkhouse porch to breathe the clean air. She hadn't expected Eli to be there. He was leaning against the porch rail, watching the last light fade from the hills. He looked at her when she came out, said nothing. Looked back at the hills. She sat on the steps. He stayed at the rail. The creek talked to itself in the dark. A night bird called once and went silent. They didn't speak. There was nothing that needed to be said. Not right now, not tonight. The day had been long and the work had been real, and the air was clean after the rain, and it was enough to sit in the presence of another person who didn't require anything from you, who didn't need you to explain yourself or justify your existence or prove that you deserved to take up space. After a while, she noticed that his hand was on the rail and hers was on the step below. They were not touching. They were close enough that the gap between them was less like a distance and more like a choice. Neither of them closed it. Neither of them moved away. When she went to bed an hour later, she carried the warmth of that hour with her like something she hadn't had in a long time, the simple, undemanding company of someone who saw her. She didn't know yet that Walt the next morning would sit her down quietly and tell her about Sarah, the woman who had waited for Eli Hargrove to come home from the war and found a stranger when he arrived who had tried for 2 years to reach him and finally left. She didn't know that the story would clarify something she'd been sensing without being able to name. She didn't know any of that yet. What she knew was the warmth of the hour after rain and the creak in the dark and the inch of space between two hands that had chosen to remain precisely where they were. That was enough for now. That was more than she'd had in 3 years. Walt told her about Sarah on a Tuesday morning, 8 days after Maggie had arrived at the ranch. She was in the main house working through the last of the mending pile, a coat that needed its lining replaced careful work, when Walt came in without knocking and sat down across the table from her. He set 2 cups of coffee down, pushed one toward her and looked at it for a long moment before he spoke. "I don't usually stick my nose in other people's business," he said, but I've worked for Eli Hargrove for 6 years. He drank his coffee. Watched him build this place from land and stubbornness. Watched him be the best rancher in 3 counties and one of the loneliest men I've ever known. Watched women from town try to get his attention for 5 years and watched him not notice any of them. He set down his cup. And then I watched what happened when he walked into that store. Maggie kept her hands on the coat. Nothing happened. Something happened. I've known that man for 6 years. I know the difference between the way he moves when he's got nothing particular in mind and the way he moves when he's decided something. He was quiet a moment. "I'm telling you about Sarah because I think you ought to know it, not to scare you. The other way around." She set down the coat. "Tell me." Her name was Sarah Keene. He met her before the war. She was a school teacher's daughter, the kind of quiet, serious girl that serious men fall for. They were engaged when he enlisted. She waited. Walt turned his coffee cup. He came back wrong. Not violent, not dangerous, just gone. Like the person who'd left had left most of himself in that burning camp outside Atlanta and come back mostly empty. She tried. God love her, she tried for 2 years. He'd let her in so far, and then he'd pull away again every time. He was convinced, Walt paused, that he'd used up his ability to be what someone needed, that the war had taken that out of him along with everything else. So every time she got close, he found a reason to create distance, until she stopped trying. Where is she now? Married, children. San Antonio, I think. Happy from what I hear. Walt looked at her directly. Eli told me once after she left that the worst part wasn't losing her. The worst part was that he hadn't been able to make himself feel sorry enough when she went, that he'd been almost relieved because it meant he couldn't hurt her anymore. He stood picking up his cup. "I'm not telling you this to warn you off. I'm telling you so that when he pulls back, because he will, it's his habit, you'll know it's not about you." After he left, Maggie sat for a long time with her hands on the unfinished coat. She thought about a man who had walked through fire for his people and come back believing himself incapable of love. She thought about the particular loneliness of that, not the loneliness of being without someone, but the loneliness of believing yourself past deserving. She recognized it. She picked up the coat and kept working. The day after she found the letter, she went about her work as though nothing had changed. Because in practical terms, nothing had the seams still needed. Closing the buttons still needed replacing the world, still demanded to be managed. But inside, something was different. Something had been unlocked. She thought about what it would mean to tell Eli. Not about the letter specifically, though she would tell him she'd decided that, but about the larger thing, the 3 years of believing she had been abandoned, the weight of a shame that had never actually been hers to carry. She thought about the way trauma calcifies if you leave it alone, the way a story told about you by people with power can start to feel like memory, like fact, like the shape of who you are. She had been living inside Walter Ashford's story about her for 3 years. She was done with that. On the morning of the 11th day, she finished the last piece of the mending pile, a coat with a ruined lining, the most complex repair in the stack, and spread it out flat on the table and looked at it. Everything in that pile had been broken or torn or worn past usefulness. Everything in that pile was now sound again. The seams were true, the fabric whole, the buttons firmly attached. You'd have to look very hard to find where anything had been fixed. She thought, this is what I do. I find the break, and I close it, and I make it hold. She was still looking at the finished pile when Eli appeared in the doorway. He looked at it, then at her, then at the coat. He picked up the coat and examined the lining she'd replaced, new fabric matched to the old, the seam she'd laid, so that it would bear the stress of use without giving way again. "You're good at this," he said. "I know." She said it without apology. "I keep saying that, and you keep acting like I'm being bold." "I'm just being accurate." He set the coat down. "Is there anything else?" "In the mending pile, no." "You're caught up." She paused. "There's something else, though. Something I need to tell you." She picked up the letter from the pocket of her work apron, where she had been carrying it for a day and a half. "I found this in Mrs. Patterson's box." She held it out to him. He took it, read it standing at the work table, and she watched his face, the careful neutrality of it, shifting, softening the way it did when something had found a way past his defenses. When he finished, he lowered the letter and looked at her. "He thought you were pregnant," he said. "Yes." He was wrong, but he believed it with everything he had. She met his eyes. "He didn't run from me. He ran towards something that didn't exist yet, and he died for it." She was steady. She'd found her way to steady over the course of a day and a half, and she intended to stay there. "The Ashfords let me believe a lie for 3 years. They had reasons to destroy Daniel's reputation, and they used them." She paused. "I think they had more reasons than I've understood yet. I think this letter is one piece of something larger." Eli was quiet for a long moment. "You're probably right," he said finally. "I know I'm right. I just don't have all the pieces yet." He handed the letter back. "We'll get them after. After Renfrew, I know." She tucked the letter back in her pocket. "The thing I wanted you to know is that I've been carrying this for 3 years. The believing of it, the weight of it, and now I'm not. Something has been set down." She held his gaze. "I'm not the same person who got on that wagon 2 weeks ago." He studied her face. "You look different. I feel different." She picked up the coat, folded it carefully. "Not lighter exactly, more like myself, like I found something I'd misplaced." He was quiet and she could see him thinking, and then he said, "There's something I want to ask you. Soon. Ask me now." "Not now, Trey," the almost smile. "Ask me to wait." "Wait," she said, "but not too long." That evening at supper, Cody asked her if she'd ever been out to the East Meadow. The what? East Meadow. He was eating with the unself-conscious enthusiasm of someone who has never had reason to doubt his right to food. "About a mile out along the creek. There's a place where the bluestem grass grows tall. In the evening it goes gold. Boss never goes out there much, but the horses like it." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Walt said you'd been looking at the hills like you wanted to know what was on the other side of them." He grinned at her. "You should ask the boss to take you." That night she asked Eli if he would show her the East Meadow. He looked at her with the expression that she'd learned to read as surprised by the specific thing, but not by the impulse. "Tomorrow," and he said, "after the morning work." They rode out together in the late morning, she on Ember, who had become familiar territory over 2 weeks of lessons, and he on the gray gelding he favored for distance work. The creek followed them east, chattering over the stones. The land opened up as they came over a low rise, and then she saw what Cody had meant. The bluestem grass was waist-high and turning gold in the October approach, and the meadow curved along the creek for a quarter-mile. And above it, the sky was the specific deep blue of Texas autumn, and there was nothing between her and the horizon except the grass moving in the wind. She stopped Ember at the meadow's edge and just looked. "It's beautiful," she said. "I forget that," he said beside her. "I've ridden past it so many times it's stopped registering." He looked at Violet with the attention she'd redirected toward it. "It's beautiful." They sat their horses at the edge of the east meadow for a while, not going in, not needing to. Sometimes the looking is enough. On the ride back, she told him about her father's farm in East Texas, the place she'd grown up, the timber country, the specific green of the summer pines and the red of the clay earth. She hadn't talked about it in years. It felt good to talk about it. It felt like reclaiming something she'd given up without intending to. He told her about the camp outside Atlanta. Not the fire, she'd heard that part. The before. What it had been like in the months before the fire, the way the war had changed, the quality of time making each day feel simultaneously too short and endless. The way Jesse had laughed, a specific, particular laugh, the kind you remember decades later without trying. The way 22 men had each been a specific person, and how the specificness of them was the thing that made the loss specific, and how he'd spent 13 years trying to make it less specific and failing. "You shouldn't try to make it less," she said. "What should I do with it?" "Carry it gently," she said. "The same thing I said about Daniel. Don't try to make it smaller. Just hold it without letting it hold you." He looked at her with the amber eyes that held more than he showed most of the time. "You've gotten very wise in 2 weeks," he said. "I've had 3 years of forced contemplation." She kept her face serious. "It has its uses." He almost laughed. The almost laugh she had decided was almost better than the real one. Simone. It was the almost laugh she had started falling for back when she hadn't let herself name what she was falling for. The almost laugh was the door opening. 3 days after that conversation, she found the box. She had been reorganizing the storage room off the main house clearing space to set up a proper work table with better light when she shifted a stack of old crates and found a small wooden box wedged between the wall and the bottom crate. It was the kind of box a seamstress might keep the size of a Bible, latched with a simple brass hook, the wood worn smooth with handling. Mrs. Patterson's, she thought immediately. The seamstress who'd worked here before her, whose failing eyesight had let the mending pile grow for 6 months. She should set it aside, return it, or send it on. She opened it anyway. She didn't know why. Inside, needles and paper sleeves, a collection of thread ends, a worn pin cushion shaped like a tomato, and at the bottom folded small an envelope. The envelope was sealed, but the seal was old, brittle, cracking at the edges, and on the front, in careful, deliberate handwriting, was an address. Miss Margaret Calloway, care of General Delivery, Harlan's Crossing, Texas. Maggie's hands went cold. She sat down on the floor of the storage room with the box in her lap and looked at the envelope for a long time. Her name in a handwriting she didn't recognize. An envelope that had never been sent. An address in a town she'd been trying to leave since the day Daniel was taken away. She opened it. "Dear Miss Calloway, I am writing this letter knowing I should have written it 3 years ago. I am a coward and I know it. I have prayed over this letter for 3 years and been too afraid to send it, and I am writing it now because I can't sleep anymore, and because I think God is done with my excuses. I was the Harlan's Crossing midwife for 40 years. I have kept secrets for 40 years. I kept one that I should not have kept. 2 weeks before Daniel was caught, he came to see me. He was frightened and hopeful, and trying very hard to seem neither. He asked me quietly, carefully, the way young husbands ask when they don't know how to say it plainly, whether I could tell him with any certainty whether his wife was with child. He believed you were pregnant, Miss Calloway. He had convinced himself of it. I don't know why. You showed no signs that I could see, but Daniel had decided, and Daniel, when he decided, was not easily moved. He told me he needed to provide for you and the baby. He told me he had a plan to get some money quickly. I didn't ask what the plan was. I should have asked. I should have told him you weren't pregnant. But he was out the door before I could say it, and I told myself I'd catch up to him. I'd tell him the next day I'd set things right. The next day he was in custody. He stole those horses to provide for a baby that didn't exist, and he died for it, and the whole town let you believe he'd done it to escape you. That is a lie. I have known it was a lie for 3 years. I knew who was spreading that lie, and I knew why. The Ashfords had powerful reasons to want Daniel Calloway's reputation destroyed, and powerful men make decisions easier for cowards like me. I am sorry, Miss Calloway. I am sorry I let you carry this for 3 years. Daniel Calloway was a fool, but he was a fool who loved you past all sense and reason. He died running toward you, not away, yours in shame and regret. Eleanor Patterson. Maggie sat on the floor of the storage room for a long time. Outside, she could hear the cowboys working. Horses, the creek, wind in the cottonwoods along the south fence. All the ordinary sounds of the world going on, without regard for the thing that had just shifted on its axis inside her. He died running toward you, not away. 3 years. 3 years of carrying the weight of it, the question beneath every other question, the thing she had never let herself ask out loud, because the asking felt like betrayal. Why, Daniel? Why those horses? Why did you leave me? He hadn't left. He'd been trying to get to her. He'd been trying to get to a child that didn't exist yet, that he'd imagined into being out of love and hope, in the particular way young husbands who are afraid of failing project their fears forward into the future. He had died for a mistake, yes, but the mistake had come from love. She sat on the floor until her legs went numb. Then she stood, put the letter in her pocket, and went back to work. She did not tell Eli. Not yet. The letter felt too large to share immediately, too raw, like a wound that needed to be held privately for a while before it could be shown. But she knew somewhere in the part of her that had been grieving without permission for 3 years that something had been set free. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay on the real mattress and listened to the creak, and thought about Daniel, and then thought about Eli, and then thought about the way two people could spend years carrying damage they'd been told was their fault, and how the weight of other people's cruelty could become so familiar that you stopped feeling it as an imposition and started feeling it as simply the natural shape of the world. She thought about the inch between two hands on a rainy evening. She thought about Sarah Keene, who had tried and been kept at distance by a man who believed himself incapable. She thought about the letter in her pocket, and she thought, I know what it is to be told a story about yourself that isn't true and to carry it for so long that it starts to feel like memory. She was still awake when the rider came. Fast hoofbeats at midnight. Urgent. Foam on the horse's mouth when she looked through her window and saw it pull up to the main house. Eli was on the porch. In 30 seconds he slept lightly, she'd learned. The instinct of a man who had once lost 22 men in a fire while he slept. The rider handed him something. An envelope. Rode off immediately without dismounting fully. Even at this distance, she could see the change in Eli's face as he read. She had her boots on before she consciously decided to put them on, and she crossed the yard at a run. What is it? He looked up. His face was pale in the moonlight. Carefully, deliberately pale, the kind of pale that is the product of practiced control over an internal reaction that would otherwise be alarming. Cole Renfrew. He held up the crumpled letter. He's coming. The letter says 3 days. Renfrew doesn't send advance notice out of courtesy. He could already be closer. Could be. He crushed the paper in his fist. I'm sending you away. Tomorrow morning. Dutch will take you to... No. Maggie. I said no. She stepped closer. She was not going to shout. She was not going to lose her composure. She was going to say this clearly and mean every word of it. I don't run. I've been telling you that since the first day. This isn't about running. This is about survival. Renfrew doesn't fight the way Rose Beaumont fights. He won't come with rumors and social pressure. He'll come with guns. His jaw was tight. He will hurt everyone I care about to get to me. That includes you. Then let him come. She held his eyes. I was sleeping in a horse stall 3 weeks ago. I was eating whatever scraps I could earn, washing other people's laundry. I had nothing and nobody, and no reason to keep going except stubbornness. She paused. You gave me a reason. Not just a room, a reason. I'm not walking away from that because someone is angry at you. Maggie, you're stuck with me, Eli Hargrove. And if you don't tell your men what's coming and start making a plan, then the most stubborn woman you've ever met is going to make one for you. He stared at her. In the moonlight, his face went through several things in rapid succession, and then the wall he'd been maintaining, she had watched it for 2 weeks, the careful distance shifted, not collapsed, just shifted. You're the most obstinate person I have ever met, he said. You're the most pig-headed man I have ever spoken to. We're evenly matched then. We are. Something in his face broke open just a little. Not the wall itself, but a door in the wall, a door that hadn't been opened in a long time. He reached out and took her hand. Just her hand, nothing more, but it was deliberate, intentional, the reaching of a man who has thought about the consequences and reached anyway. Together then, he said, we handle this together. She squeezed his hand once. Together, she said. When they woke the bunkhouse at midnight, 6 men around the table in the lamplight. Walt at one end with his arms crossed, Cody at the other, looking young and trying not to show it. Dutch hadn't gone to bed yet. He had the long-distance instinct of an old ranch hand who feels changes in the weather before they arrive. Eli told them about Renfrew in 3 sentences. The room absorbed it the way experienced men absorb bad news, with silence first, then motion. When? Walt asked. Letter says 3 days. Don't trust the letter. How many men? Doesn't say. Renfrew never worked alone. Cody shifted in his seat. He's coming because of her, isn't he, Mrs. Calloway? He's coming because of me, Eli said. Someone told him I had something to lose. That's why he moved on this now. His voice was careful. Whoever told him, that's a question for after. Right now, the question is how we defend this ranch. Maggie had expected to be sent out of the room at this point. She wasn't. Eli looked at her and then at his men. She stays. She'll be in the main house with me. She's the best shot in the room when she's given enough time to steady. This was not actually information they had established, but he said it with such certainty that she made a mental note to live up to it, and she doesn't lose her head. Walt looked at Maggie. You good with a rifle? My father was a hunter. I grew up with guns. She held Walt's gaze. I'm better with a Henry repeating than with a Colt, but I can use either. Walt grunted. It was from Walt high praise. They planned through the night. Eli knew the ranch the way a body knows itself, every approach, every rise and hollow, every place a man could use for cover. He drew the layout in the dirt floor with a stick while the others gathered around. Creek bed on the east is the main vulnerability, he said. A man can follow it to within 50 yards of the main house without being seen from the road. Walt, you and Miguel take the rocks above the east bend. Stop anything that comes through. Walt nodded. Pete, Danny Barnroof. You about got the best sight lines in Tharth Valley from up there. You see anyone moving on the open ground, you take them. He moved the stick. Cody Tom bunkhouse. Windows face north and west. Anyone coming from the hills comes through your field of view first. He paused. I'll be in the main house. Maggie will be with me. She'll reload. I'll shoot. We hold until we've reduced their numbers enough to break the attack, then we push out and end it. And Renfrew himself, Pete asked. He'll be watching. He's smart. He'll send his men first and wait to see how we respond. He'll look for the weakness and come through it himself. Eli's eyes moved to Maggie briefly. He'll know about her. He'll try to use her. Then we make sure he can't get to her, Walt said. That's the plan. After the others left for their positions, Eli and Maggie sat on the bunkhouse porch in the dark. The ranch was quiet around them. The kind of quiet that has weight to it, that feels like the pause before something. Tell me about Renfrew, she said. Really? He was quiet for a moment, then quiet in the way that meant he was deciding to be honest rather than careful. He was one of my first hires. Good with cattle, better with horses, fast with a gun. I trusted him more than I should have. I was still learning those first years, learning what to look for in people. He looked at the dark hills. I caught him 3 months in selling my cattle to a man across the border at half price. He'd been skimming every week. When I confronted him, he denied it, called me paranoid, said the war had made me see enemies where there were none. A pause. That one landed. That's probably why I waited too long to act. I fired him a week later. He drew on me in the barn. He held up his right hand in the darkness, flexed the fingers. I was faster. Shot him through the shoulder. Let him ride out. Why didn't you finish it? Because I was tired of killing. His voice cracked just slightly on the last word. The war, I killed boys. Some of them weren't old enough to shave. I told myself when I got to Texas that I was done with that I could show mercy, that mercy was possible. He was quiet. Mercy rode off to El Paso and spent 2 years sharpening itself into something harder. She looked at him in the darkness. This man who had gone back into fire for a dead boy and shot a traitor through the shoulder instead of the heart and spent 13 years sleeping lightly and maintaining careful distance from everyone who might matter. She reached into her pocket and took out the letter. "I found something today," she said, "in the storage room, in a box that belonged to Mrs. Patterson." She held out the envelope. He took it. He read it by the light coming through the bunkhouse window, and she watched his face change as he read. Watched the careful neutrality soften into something that was the opposite of neutral. When he finished, he lowered the letter. "She thought you were..." "He thought I was pregnant." Her voice was steady. She had been working towards steady for hours. "He wasn't running away from me. He was running towards something he was afraid didn't exist yet." She paused. "He died for a child that hadn't happened. For love that was real even when it was wrong." Eli was quiet for a long time. "The Ashfords," he said finally. "Patterson said they had reasons to want his reputation destroyed." Yes, she'd been thinking about that all day. "I don't know all of it yet, but Walter Ashford has been running this town for 30 years and my husband died on the wrong side of him, and the story they told about why I think that story was useful to someone." She looked at the dark hills. "I think there's more to it than I've understood." He reached out and took her hand again. Different from the first time, not the deliberate, careful reaching of a man deciding to trust, but the instinctive movement of a man who needed to hold on to something true. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what you've been carrying. You've been carrying things too. It's not the same." "No, but it rhymes." He almost laughed. She had not heard him laugh yet, not a real one, but this was close, the almost laugh, the edge of it. "When this is over," he said, "when this is over, what..." "There's something I need to ask you. Something important." "Ask me now." "Not now." He squeezed her hand. When we're not about to fight a war, ask me to remember." "I'll remember." They sat there until the sky began to gray at the East End, hands interlocked, awaiting. Yes, it came at noon, which told Maggie that Renfrew was not given to patience. A man who could be ready to move had been ready for at least a day, probably longer. Cody saw them from the bunkhouse window pressed against the north glass with the spyglass Eli had given him. He was across the yard and pounding on the main house door in 30 seconds. Riders, North Hills, coming fast. 10 of them spreading out as they descended exactly as Eli had predicted, not a direct approach, but a fan designed to force defenders to cover multiple angles at once. Professional organized. Renfrew had hired men who knew what they were doing. "How many?" Eli asked. 10, maybe 11. They split at the ridge for heading east. Cody looked at Eli. "Creek bed." "Walt's already in position." Eli chambered around, handed Maggie the Henry. "You remember what I taught you?" "Load handed up, stay low." She met his eyes. "Don't die." "In that order." Something moved in his face, the almost smile again, sharper now. "If anyone comes through that door who isn't me or one of the men, shoot first." "I know." "Stay down." "I know, Eli." He looked at her for one more second. Then, "Let's go." The first shot came from the barn roof. Pete was a dead shot, had been since before the war. Eli had set a talent that required no training because some people were simply built with the eye and the hand already aligned. The lead rider went down hard. His horse kept going. The others scattered. Some used the scattered pine at the valley edge for cover. Some dove behind the water trough in the woodpile. One kept riding low on his horse's neck, coming straight for the main house, brave or desperate. Maggie couldn't tell, and it didn't matter. Eli fired twice. The horse went down. The man rolled clear and came up shooting. A bullet punched through the window frame above her head, spraying splinters across her shoulder. She didn't scream. She reloaded. Load. Hand it up. Load. Hand it up. Gunfire from the east, Walt and Miguel catching whoever had tried the creek bed. 2 shots, a pause. 1 more shot. The sound she'd taught herself to count in the hour before the attack came. "They're trying to thin us out," Eli said, ducking below the window. "Draw our attention in different directions." "Is it working?" "Not yet." He fired again. "How many loaded?" 3 ready, 2 more on the floor. "Good, don't get ahead of yourself." The next 40 minutes were chaos distilled to its most basic elements: noise, smoke, the smell of powder, and the narrow tunnel of focus that Maggie had not known she possessed until she found herself inside it. Her whole world became the rhythm reach, load hand repeat, the rifle sliding into her hands and out again. The brass casings scattering across the floorboards, Eli's voice counting and calling without panic. The occasional shout from outside when something went right or wrong. Someone screamed. High young Cody's voice. The sound of it cut through everything. That's Cody. She was already moving before Eli's hand caught her arm. Stay by. He's hurt. She looked at Eli. I have the medical kit. I have the needle and thread. You know what I can do. A beat. She could see him calculating the soldier's math of who was needed where and what the cost of each decision was. Go to the bunkhouse. Straight line, low. Do you hear me? I hear you, I mean it, Maggie. She was out the door. The yard felt enormous. The distance between the main house and the bunkhouse was 30 feet, which under normal circumstances took about 10 seconds. And in the seconds she spent crossing it, the dust kicked up around her feet twice, from bullets hitting the ground. And she did not look at where they came from. She looked at the bunkhouse door and ran. She hit the door with her shoulder and went down hard on the wooden floor sliding. Tom had the door closed behind her in one motion. Jesus. Where is he? Not a question. Cody was on the floor near the north window, his right leg stretched out and his hands pressed against his thigh. His face was the color of old ash and he was shaking with controlled violence, fighting the shock, fighting the sounds, fighting the thing inside him that wanted to make noise about the pain. She knelt beside him. Let me see. He moved his hands. The bullet had gone in through the outer thigh and stopped. She could feel the shape of it just under the skin, close to the surface. Lucky. Devastating lucky, the kind of lucky that would have been disaster 6 inches in any other direction. I'm going to get it out, she said. It's going to hurt worse before it stops. Are you listening to me? Yes, ma'am. His voice was thin but present. You're going to be fine. This is what I do. I fix things. She heard the bunkhouse door open behind her and knew it was Eli before she turned. He came in low blood, darkening his left shoulder jaw, set in the particular way of a man who is overriding significant physical pain through sheer discipline. The shoulder, she said immediately. The shoulder first, Cody second. Sit down. Maggie, we don't have time. We have exactly as much time as it takes me to stitch you up so you don't bleed out. Sit down. He sat. The bullet had gone through cleanly in one side of the shoulder, out the other. Good fortune again, the kind that comes from being slightly turned at the right moment from the bullet hitting muscle rather than artery or bone. She poured whiskey into the wound. He flinched, the only outward sign he gave, and his hand found hers and held it with the grip of a man who was not going to ask for help, but was going to take it when it came to him. I'm sorry, she said, threading the needle with fingers she forced steady by will. Don't apologize. His voice was rough but clear. Just work. She worked. 8 stitches, small and tight and even. She had done this before, not gunshot wounds, but wounds. Her father had been a man who worked with his hands and broke them regularly and couldn't afford a doctor. She had learned to stitch when she was 12 years old, and she had never unlearned it. She bandaged the shoulder, told him not to move the arm. Then she moved to Cody. The bullet took longer to get out. She had to cut down to it. A small incision with Walt's knife held over a candle flame, Cody biting down on a leather strap and not disgracing himself despite the sounds that wanted out. When she dropped the bullet on the floorboards, it rang against the wood like a small, terrible bell. Almost done, she said, and it was true, and she stitched the wound closed and wrapped it tight and said again, You're going to be fine. Thanks to you, Cody said. His color was coming back slowly. Boss said you fix things. Everything's worth saving. She said the same thing she'd told him about the shirt, if you know how to stitch it back together. Walt was at the window. They're pulling back, moving toward the tree line. Renfrew regrouping, Eli said. He pushed to his feet using the good shoulder to lever himself up. His face was pale, but his eyes were alert. He'll come again. He'll change the approach. The sun was low over the western hills. They had Maggie estimated an hour of real daylight left. Then we wait for him, she said. The second attack came in darkness. They'd lit every lantern in the bunkhouse, a decision that seemed counterintuitive, until Eli explained it. The light inside would make it impossible for anyone looking in from outside to see clearly while the sudden blaze of the open doors would illuminate anyone caught in the yard. On my signal, Eli had said, then we push out hard and light up the ground. 3, 2, 1. The doors flew open. Cowboys poured out. Two of Renfrew's men were caught in the middle of the yard, fully exposed in the sudden flood of lantern light. They went down fast, Walt and Pete moving with the efficiency of men who have done difficult things before and know how to do them again without hesitation. A third dove behind the water trough. Red and Miguel flanked him. It was over in seconds. 3 more men accounted for. Renfrew himself still nowhere. Maggie felt the particular stillness of the room before she heard the sound. A hammer being pulled back, the small sound that contains multitudes. She turned. Cole Renfrew had come through the bunkhouse window at the back, the one that faced the creek, the one they'd covered on the east, but not on the close west, the one that had been overlooked because it was too small, too inconvenient, too obvious a point to dismiss. He was older than she'd imagined. Gray in the beard, deep lines around the eyes, the particular weathering of a man who has lived hard and chosen to live that way. His hand was absolutely steady. The pistol was at her temple. The room froze. "Hello, Eli." His voice was almost pleasant. "Been a while." Eli had gone completely still. The kind of still that wasn't paralysis. It was the opposite of paralysis, the coiled readiness of a man holding his reaction back with everything he had. "Let her go." "I don't think I'll do that." Renfrew's eyes moved over the room, cataloging, counting, assessing. "I've been watching you, these past 2 weeks. Watching how you look at her, watching how you put her cabin by the creek instead of in the main house where you could protect her easier." He smiled. It was the smile of a man who had found what he was looking for. "She's your weakness. I knew it the moment I read the letter." "This is between us, Renfrew." It was, until she showed up, until someone smart enough to see it wrote and told me. He pressed the gun harder against Maggie's temple. "Drop your weapons, all of you, or I put a bullet in her brain and watch how you feel about mercy then." Eli's eyes moved to Maggie. She held his gaze. She gave him the smallest possible shake of her head. "Don't surrender. Don't do it for me." But she could see him calculating, and she could see the weight of the calculation on his face, and she knew he was going to drop the rifle. He dropped the rifle. The other men followed. The sound of weapons hitting the floor was a series of dull thuds, each one a closing door. Renfrew began to back toward the door, dragging Maggie with him. "Here's how this goes. I take her with me. You let me ride. In a week you'll get pieces of her in the mail. The only way she lives is if you let me reach my horse and pray I get bored before I get creative." Maggie's heart was very loud in her ears. "There's something in his coat pocket," she said clearly. Renfrew's eyes narrowed. "Shush, shut up. He came here for money, not revenge." She kept her eyes on Eli's. She was speaking to Eli, not to Renfrew, speaking in the code of 2 people who had learned to say things without words. "He's not here because he hates you. He's here because someone paid him and promised him something worth more than grudges." I said, "Shut up. You told me you weren't a man who runs." She held Eli's eyes. "You're the man who goes back." Renfrew tightened his grip. Maggie drove her elbow backward into his stomach. It wasn't a strong blow. She knew that as she threw it, knew her body wasn't capable of the force she needed. But it didn't have to be strong. It only had to be unexpected, in a fraction of a second, and enough to make the hand with the gun move. It was enough. Eli crossed the distance in 2 strides. His hand caught Renfrew's gun hand at the wrist and twisted, and the pistol went off into the ceiling. Not into anyone, and then they went down together in a crash of bodies and furniture. Red pulled Maggie backward and out of the way. She stood at the doorway and watched. It was not the choreographed violence of stories. It was brutal and close and ugly. 2 men fighting with the desperation of people who were both fighting for their lives. Renfrew, with the ferocity of a cornered animal. Eli, with the controlled violence of a man who had decided that mercy had a limit. Renfrew got the gun. Eli slammed his hand against the floor until the gun skittered away. Renfrew headbutted him, and Eli went back, and Renfrew dove for the gun, and Eli grabbed his ankle and dragged him back, and they crashed into the table and chairs went flying. A lantern fell. The oil spread across the floor, and the foam found it in less than a second. Fire. No. Maggie took 2 steps forward before Red caught her again. The fire climbed the wall. The bunkhouse had been built for function, not for fire resistance, and the walls caught with the speed of old dry wood. Smoke filled the room. Through the smoke, she could see them still fighting Eli on top, Renfrew producing a knife from his boot, the blade catching the light of the burning walls. Eli caught the wrist, strained, held. "You should have finished it 2 years ago," Renfrew said. "I know," Eli said. He twisted the knife. Renfrew went still. Eli stood. The bunkhouse was burning around him, the walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath his feet. He stood in the fire looking at the man who had come here for money and ended here instead, and then the ceiling groaned and smoke poured down, and Maggie screamed his name from the door. He moved toward where the door should have been. Couldn't see it. Smoke was everywhere. He thought Jesse, the boy in the fire, the one he hadn't reached. Not this time. He crawled along the floor where the air was slightly clearer, feeling for the wall, feeling for the door, and then a hand grabbed his not gentle, not careful gripping with the desperation of someone who is not going to let go, regardless of the caught Maggie's hand. Come on, I've got you, come on." She pulled him through the burning door into the night. They fell together in the dirt, coughing, gasping. Behind them, the bunkhouse roof came down with a sound like the end of something. He looked at her face in the firelight, black with soot, wet with tears. She hadn't noticed herself crying. Eyes that had gone through 5 kinds of terror and come out on the other side, still looking at him. "You came back," he said. "I told you to run." "I told you." She was still holding his hand. "I don't run." He put his forehead against hers. For a long time, they just breathed. The morning after the fire, the Hargrove ranch was a different place. The bunkhouse was gone, nothing left but the skeleton of the main beams and a mound of ash still breathing smoke into the early air. 3 of Renfrew's men lay in the yard covered with canvas waiting to be dealt with. The others had scattered in the night. Walt said they had heard 2 horses heading south at speed around 3 in the morning, and those men were not likely to come back. Eli sat on the main house porch with fresh bandages on his shoulder watching the smoke. Maggie had restitched the wound by candlelight, 6 additional sutures, her hands steady in the way that hands sometimes go steady when the alternative is unacceptable. She had worked without speaking, and he had sat without moving, and somewhere in that hour of necessary quiet, something had settled between them that needed no words. Red brought coffee, set it down beside Eli without comment, and crouched to eye level. "Lost the bunkhouse. Barn standing, cattle scattered, but they'll come back to water. Billy's leg is bad, but he'll keep it. Miguel's arm is a graze, nothing more. Everyone else is shook up, but whole." He paused. "Renfrew, I buried him north fence line. Didn't seem right to put him anywhere decent. The men who got away," Eli said. "Story they're going to tell is about how they came to kill Caleb Hargrove and got killed instead. That's not a story that makes us look weak." Red glanced toward Maggie, who was helping Tom sort through salvageable supplies from the barn. "That's not the story that worries you." "No. Town's going to say she brought this on us." Eli was quiet. "I've worked it for you 6 years, Red said. Watched you build this place from nothing. Never once seen you care about what Harlan's Crossing thought. I didn't have anything to protect before." Red looked at him for a moment. "You've got something worth protecting now." He stood. "Ask her. Whatever you've been turning over in your head for 3 days, just ask her." He started to walk away. "And boss, she's not going to say no." "How do you know that?" Red glanced back. "Because I've got eyes." He walked toward the barn. "Also because you've had your mother's ring in your vest pocket since the day after the attack, and you keep touching it when you think nobody's watching." Eli's hand moved involuntarily to his vest pocket. The small, hard shape of the ring pressed against his fingers. He looked across the yard to where Maggie stood in the morning light. She was in the process of organizing something with the quiet, purposeful efficiency she brought to everything, her hair escaping its braid on one side, her hands quick and certain, a smear of ash still on her jaw from last night that she hadn't noticed yet. He thought about Sarah, about the 2 years of distance he'd maintained and the hurt it had caused, and the relief he'd felt when she'd gone, which was the worst part, the relief. He had told himself that the relief meant something real about his capacity, confirmed his belief that he had used up what was needful for love. But he had not felt relieved when he'd thought Renfrew was going to take Maggie. He had felt something that started in his chest and ran through his whole body like electricity, the particular terror of a man who has discovered at the worst possible moment the true eyes of what he stands to lose. She found him by the corral an hour later watching the horses. "You should be resting." "Can't rest." He turned when she approached. "Too much to think about." "Then think out loud." He was quiet for a moment. She waited. She'd learned to wait for him, had learned the rhythm of how he moved toward honesty, slowly, deliberately, like a man crossing uncertain ground by testing each step before he trusted it. "I've been alone for 13 years, he said finally. "I built walls so high I couldn't see over them. Told myself it was what I needed, what I deserved, even after everything. That solitude was a reasonable price for not hurting anyone else." He looked at the horses. "And then you walked into a general store with blood on your knuckles, and in about 3 weeks, you walked through those walls like they were made of paper." Maggie said nothing. "I've failed at this before," he said. "I pushed away someone who deserved better because I didn't know how to let her in. I told myself it was mercy protecting her from what I'd become." He turned to look at Maggie directly. "I don't want to fail with you. I'm aware that wanting to not fail is not the same as knowing how to succeed. I'm aware that I'm a difficult person with significant damage and no particular talent for being easy to know. Neither am I. You're the most straightforward person I've met in my adult life. I'm not straightforward. I've just stopped pretending to be less than I am." She held his gaze. "You're different from the person who pushed Sarah away. I've seen the evidence. You told me about Jesse. You let me touch the scars. You put me in the cabin by the creek and taught me to ride and sat with me in the rain without saying a word, and all of those were choices. The person Walt described doesn't make those choices." He reached into his vest pocket. The ring was small, a thin gold band with a blue stone, simple, worn smooth with age. He held it in his palm and looked at it for a moment. "This was my mother's," he said. "She died when I was 12. This is the only thing of hers I kept." He looked up at Maggie. "It's yours if you want it." She stood very still. "Before I answer," she said, "I need you to understand something. Tell me, I'm not the woman who walked into that store 3 weeks ago." She said it clearly, carefully, as though she had been practicing it for the occasion, which she had, in the quiet of the cabin the previous night, going over the shape of it until she had it right. That woman would have said yes to anything that offered safety. She would have said yes because she had nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. She held his eyes. "I'm saying yes because I want to, because I choose you, not the ranch, not the protection, not the story of the woman who was saved. You, the man who crossed the street because someone was being cruel and who carries the weight of 22 names and who sat beside me in the rain without needing to say anything." She paused. "I choose you, Eli Hargrove, on purpose, with full information." He held out the ring. She took it, slid it onto her finger, looked at it for a moment, the simple gold and the worn blue stone in the morning light. "Yes," she said, "I'll marry you." He kissed her. It was different from the desperate clutch of the night before the battle that had been the grip of two people holding on to each other against the dark. This was something else, quiet, deliberate, the beginning of a promise. When they stepped apart, she was laughing, which surprised her. She hadn't laughed not like that, not from the inside, in a very long time. "The town's going to lose their minds," she said. "Let them. Vivian Ashford is going to... Vivian Ashford is going to answer for what she's done." His voice went careful and clear. "But not like that. We're going to do this properly." That afternoon, before they rode into town, Eli showed her what Walt had found. In the pocket of Cole Renfrew's coat, folded careful as a promissory note, was a document. Walt had found it when he'd searched Renfrew's body for identification, and he'd brought it to Eli without comment, and Eli had read it and then read it again. It was a contract. 2 pages written in a clean hand, signed at the bottom by Walter Ashford. It described in careful legal language a payment arrangement between Ashford and Renfrew for services rendered in securing control of the Hargrove land holdings by any means required. It referenced in a footnote a geological survey of the area that had been conducted the previous year at Ashford's expense, a survey that had found evidence of significant mineral potential in the hill country north of Harlan's Crossing. Ashford had known about the land's value for a year. He had used his daughter to send Renfrew the information he needed. He had used Renfrew to do what violence required doing. And if Renfrew had succeeded, if Eli had been killed and Maggie taken as leverage, Ashford would have been positioned to acquire the land through a combination of debt pressure and legal maneuver, and the geological survey would have made him the richest man in the territory. Vivian had been a tool. She was guilty. Maggie had no illusions about that, but she had been used as tools or used by a man who had been treating everyone around him as instruments for 30 years. He was behind all of it, she said, from the beginning. The rumors about your husband, the social pressure. Renfrew. Eli folded the contract carefully. All of it was about the land. All of it was designed to isolate me, to eliminate anyone I might trust, drive away anyone who might matter, so that when the moment came, I'd be alone and vulnerable. Maggie looked at the contract in his hands. He destroyed my husband's reputation to keep people from asking questions, she said. He made sure the town believed Daniel was a coward, so nobody would look at the arrest too carefully. So nobody would ask whether the Ashford Bank had been putting pressure on Daniel, whether Daniel had been driven to desperation by someone. She paused. I wonder if he even needed the horses. I wonder if someone offered to pay him for them. Someone who wanted him gone, someone who set the trap. Eli was very still. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious thing to consider. She met his eyes. I want to know the truth. All of it. Not just what we can prove in a courtroom today. He nodded slowly. We'll get it. When they rode into Harlan's Crossing the next morning, 2 days after a gun battle that had left one man dead and a bunkhouse burned to the ground, Eli Hargrove rode down Main Street with his arm in a sling and his back straight, his most recently acquired employee riding beside him on the chestnut mare she'd been learning on, and 4 of his ranch hands behind them in a line. They were not hiding. They were not slipping in quietly. They were making a statement about the kind of people they were and the kind of town they intended to require this to be. Owen Aldrich dropped his broom. Vivian Ashford on the bank steps went the color of new plaster. Sheriff Dan Mosley came out of his office with his thumbs in his belt and his face in the careful arrangement of a man who is already calculating how much trouble the next few minutes are going to be. Hargrove, he nodded. Heard you had some trouble. Heard right. Renfrew came with 10 men. He's buried north of my fence line, 3 of his men with him, the rest ran. He held Mosley's gaze. I have 5 witnesses who'll testify to self-defense. I also have a piece of paper that explains why Renfrew came and who sent him. He reached into his coat and produced the contract, held it out to Mosley. The sheriff read it. His face darkened slowly the way weather changes in flat country, gradually and then all at once. This says Walter Ashford commissioned the attack on your property. It does, in his own handwriting. You can compare it to the bank documents. I've already done so. It matches. A murmur moved through the crowd that had gathered. Harlan's Crossing was a town of about 400 people on a good day, and about 300 of those people were currently in earshot of this conversation. Vivian Ashford had not moved from the bank steps. Eli turned and looked at her, directly, fully, without the careful neutrality he maintained with most people. She held his gaze for 3 seconds and then looked away. There's something else, Maggie said. Mosley looked at her. The crowd looked at her. She sat straight on the mare and looked only at the sheriff. My husband, Daniel Calloway, was arrested 3 years ago for stealing horses. He was convicted and hanged. Her voice was even. The story told about why he stole those horses was that he was trying to escape his marriage. That story was a lie spread deliberately by people who had reason to destroy his reputation and mine. She paused. I have a letter written by the former Harlan's Crossing midwife, Eleanor Patterson, now deceased, that provides an account of my husband's state of mind in the weeks before his arrest. He believed I was pregnant. He acted out of desperation and love for a family he was afraid he couldn't provide for. He was not running away from me. The crowd was very quiet. I also want to ask, she said carefully, whether the investigation at the time fully examined the possibility that the horses were stolen to order. Whether Daniel was set up, whether someone who had financial reasons to want him gone and who had a 30-year history of using the people of this town as instruments might have offered him those horses and then turned him in. She looked at Walter Ashford, who had appeared in the bank doorway at some point in the last 2 minutes. He was 63 years old, in gray, and had run this town since before most of its current residents had arrived, and he was looking at her with the expression of a man who has just realized that the thing he was afraid might happen has happened. That Sheriff Mosley said is an investigation I should have done 3 years ago. He turned to his deputy, then he turned to the crowd. Walter Ashford, he said, pulling out his handcuffs. I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. There may be additional charges pending investigation. He looked at Vivian. Vivian, Miss Ashford, I'll need a statement from you. Come voluntary or I'll come for you. Vivian Ashford looked at her father. Something passed over her face, not the dramatic villain's calculation of a woman caught, but something smaller and stranger. The look of a person who has been waiting a long time for something to collapse and has lived long enough to feel something other than triumph when it does. Walter Ashford straightened, looked at Maggie. You, he said, this is your doing. Yes, she said. Most of it was. They took Walter Ashford in handcuffs to the jail. Vivian didn't flee. She sat down on the bank steps and waited, and when Mosley's deputy came for her statement, she went with him without drama, without theatrics, with the quiet exhaustion of a woman who has been carrying something heavy for a long time. The crowd stood in the street for a while, after the way crowds do when they've witnessed something large, reluctant to disperse, not entirely sure what they've just seen. Eli dismounted, walked to Owen Aldrich's general store. Aldrich was in the doorway, pale. Owen, Mr. Hargrove, I had nothing to do with... I know you didn't. Eli's voice was not unkind. But you stood behind your counter and watched. You let it happen in your store for 3 years. You watched and you said nothing. He met the shopkeeper's eyes. Fear isn't an excuse. It's a reason. There's a difference, and I understand it. But there's a price for watching. Aldrich's face worked. What do you want from me? I want to buy your store. Eli said it simply. Whatever price you think is fair, that's what I'll pay. I'll settle it today. Aldrich stared at him. But why? Because my wife is going to run it. The word landed in the street like a stone landing in still water. Wife. Maggie dismounted and walked to stand beside Eli. She was aware of every eye on her, the same eyes that had watched her be stoned, had watched her be humiliated, had watched her walk through 3 years of cruelty without flinching. The same eyes. She did not feel triumph. She felt something more complicated and more true, the particular vertigo of a life that has turned around on itself, that has reversed so completely that the direction you were walking has become the direction you are coming from. We're getting married, Eli said to the street, to whoever was listening. The circuit judge comes through on Saturday. Everyone is invited. Everyone who never threw a rock. Everyone who treated her like a human being. He paused, scanning the faces. That's about 6 people, so there'll be plenty of food. A few uneasy laughs. But people can change, he said. I've watched it happen. I've done it myself. He looked around the street. If anyone here has something to say to Maggie Calloway, say it now. The door is open. It won't be open forever. Silence, then the shuffling of feet. Then Clara Marsh stepped forward from the crowd. She was Vivian's shadow, her echo, the woman who had repeated every cruelty back for 3 years with her own voice. She stopped in front of Maggie and looked at the ground, and then with visible effort looked up. I'm sorry, she said. Her voice was very small. I knew it was wrong. I knew Rose Viviani was being cruel, and I laughed because I was afraid of being where you were, afraid of being outside. She paused. That's not good enough. I know it's not good enough. Maggie looked at her for a long moment. Fear isn't an excuse, she said, but it is a reason. She reached out and took Clara's hand. I forgive you. Clara's face crumpled. Maggie held her hand through it. After Clara, others came. Not everyone. Some faces stayed closed, some backs turned, some old cruelties hardened into pride that would not bend. But enough. One by one, people she hadn't looked her in the eye in 3 years found their way forward. Merchants, neighbors, the woman who had stopped giving her laundry work 8 months ago, the man whose wife had organized the petition to have her removed from the boarding house. Not apologies exactly from all of them. Some only managed a nod, a ducked head, the inarticulate murmur of people who know what they should say, but haven't learned the words yet. It was enough. It was more than enough. When the last of them had moved away, Eli came to stand beside her. "Well," he said. "Well." She looked at the ring on her finger, the blue stone in the afternoon light. "That was unexpected. People surprise you. You surprise me most." She looked at him sidelong. "I expected you to be satisfied with Ashford's arrest. I didn't expect you to give the town a chance to apologize." "That wasn't for the town." He took her hand, the one with his mother's ring on it. "You're going to live here and build a life here, and I didn't want you starting it surrounded by nothing but enemies." He looked at the street. "Some of them will never come around, but the ones who can, let them." She squeezed his hand. "Take me home," she said. "I have a ranch to help rebuild and a wedding to plan." "Yes, ma'am." Before they left, Maggie went to the jail. Vivian Ashford was in the cell at the end of the corridor, sitting on the cot with her hands folded in her lap. The golden curls were still there, but disordered, and the summer peach dress had a smear of something across the hem that she hadn't bothered to wipe clean, and she looked for the first time like a person rather than a performance. She looked up when Maggie came in. Her eyes went immediately to the ring. "Come to show me that—" "No." Maggie sat down on the bench outside the cell. "I came to ask you something." Vivian said nothing. "Your father." Maggie kept her voice even. "The letters you sent to Renfrew to the man in Abilene with the survey. Did you know what he was planning? The full scope of it?" A long silence. "He told me Renfrew would come and scare you both away," Vivian said finally. "He told me it wouldn't go further than that. He told me," her voice was flat, "a lot of things that turned out not to be true." "Has he been telling you things that turned out not to be true for a long time?" Vivian looked at her hands. "My mother died when I was 7. My father raised me to understand that the world was a matter of strategy and that people were either assets or obstacles." She paused. "I have been his asset for 26 years." She looked up. "I am aware of what I did. I am aware that people were hurt because of letters I wrote. I don't say this to excuse it. There isn't an excuse." She met Maggie's eyes. "But I want you to understand that the cruelty in that store, the 3 years of all of it, it wasn't entirely about you. It was about what my father had told me I needed to be and who he'd told me needed to be removed." She paused. "I know that's not better. It might be worse. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know you're not." Maggie was quiet for a moment. "When you get out, if there's a year left, if there's 5 years, whatever the judge decides, there'll be a place for you here if you want it. Not the place you had before. A real one if you want to find out what that looks like." Vivian stared at her. "Why, I hate." "Because hate doesn't fix anything. It just spreads, and I've seen enough spreading in this town." Maggie stood. "5 years is a long time. Maybe you'll be different when it ends. Maybe you'll decide you are who your father made you. Either way, the offer stands." She walked out into the sunshine and didn't look back. The days between the confrontation and the wedding passed in the particular blur of people who are building something after it has been broken. Useful work, satisfying work, the work of clearing and remaking. The bunkhouse skeleton was pulled down and a new foundation started. Eli's men had an opinion about the new layout that differed from Eli's, and they argued about it productively the way people argue when they're rebuilding together and everyone has skin in the outcome. Maggie took possession of Aldrich's general store on Wednesday, an event marked by Aldrich signing over the deed with the expression of a man who has accepted that a large chapter of his life is closing, and by Eli paying him more than the market value without comment. She walked through the store after Aldrich left and stood in the middle of it and looked at the shelves, the counter, the window that looked out on Main Street. The same window Aldrich had watched from all those times. The same view. She was going to change everything about it. Not out of revenge, out of the simple pleasure of making a thing your own. On Friday morning, she woke before dawn. Eli was already on the porch when she came out of the main house. He was always up before her, the light sleeper, the man who had never quite lost the soldier's habit of being awake before the camp. He handed her coffee without speaking. The sky was gray and turning pink over the eastern ridge. The new bunkhouse framework was a skeleton against the lighter dark, and beyond it, the hills rolled up to the horizon, and beyond the hills there was a world she was going to have to learn how to live in, now that she was no longer simply surviving it. "I've been thinking about Daniel," she said. He waited. "I spent 3 years angry at him. Not out loud, I couldn't afford the luxury of that when everyone was already watching me for evidence of instability. But inside, I was furious at him for leaving me, for making the choice he made, for being stupid or cowardly or running or whatever story I had to tell myself to explain the inexplicable. She held her coffee cup in both hands, and then the letter it turned all of that sideways. Are you still angry? She thought about it honestly. No, I'm sad. I'm sad that he was alone with that fear, that he thought he had to solve it by himself, that he didn't trust me enough to say, Maggie, I'm terrified I can't provide for you. I'm sad that he died without knowing I would have told him it didn't matter, that we'd have figured it out together. She looked at the pink sky. He died for love. It was a foolish love and a terrible decision made from panic. But it was love. Eli was quiet for a moment. I told Sarah the same lie I told myself, he said, that I was protecting her by keeping her at distance, that she was better off without what I'd become. He looked at the hills. What I was actually doing was protecting myself from the risk of failing her, from the risk of letting her in far enough to hurt her the way I'd hurt Jesse and the others. If I never let anyone in, I couldn't fail them. He looked at her. That's what I was protecting, my record, my false innocence. He paused. You made me understand that the wall wasn't mercy. It was cowardice dressed up as sacrifice. You went back into a burning building last night. That's different. Is it? She met his eyes. You went back for Jesse even when the fire was everywhere, because walking away was something you couldn't do. And you let me in when every instinct you'd built for 13 years said to walk away. That's the same thing, Eli. That's the same you. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. A small, unconscious gesture, the kind you make when someone has become so familiar that your hands act without consulting you. Saturday, he said. Saturday. She agreed. Saturday came the way good things come after long waiting, suddenly all at once, as though time had finally decided to stop teasing. Maggie stood in the bedroom of the main house in her wedding dress, simple white cotton blue ribbons at the sleeves sewn by her own hands, over 3 sleepless nights, every stitch as careful as anything she'd ever made. It fit her better than anything she'd worn in years, because she had made it to fit the body she actually had, rather than the ghost of the body she'd once had. Clara Marsh was behind her with a brush. Can I? She'd asked, appearing at the door at dawn with the tentative quality of someone who expects to be turned away. Maggie had said yes. I still can't believe you forgave me, Clara said, working through Maggie's auburn hair. I still can't believe you came. She watched Clara's face in the mirror. It wasn't easy for you to step forward yesterday. It was terrifying. Clara's hands were gentle. Everything I did with Vivian was about not wanting to be the one standing alone. And then you were standing alone for 3 years and I watched and did nothing. She set down the brush. You were braver than me. You still are. I didn't have a choice. That makes it different. I think you always had a choice, Clara said. You chose to keep going. A knock at the door. Walt's voice the gruff formality of a man on his Sunday behavior. Ma'am, it's time. Maggie looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. The thin, hollowed woman who had walked into a general store in August was gone. In her place was a woman with fire behind her eyes, and a ring on her finger, and calluses on her hands from a month of honest work, and she was wearing a dress she'd made herself for a life she'd chosen, and she was ready. I'm ready, she said. The wedding was in the yard of the Hargrove Ranch because there was nowhere else that made sense. The bunkhouse was still a skeleton of new beams, but someone Cody, she suspected, with his crutch and his freckles and his inexhaustible cheer, had strung wildflowers through the framework. The cowboys stood in a line in their Sunday clothes with their hats in their hands, cleaned up and slightly uncomfortable, in the way of men who live outdoors and wear their best boots only for significant occasions. Half of Harlan's crossing had come. Not the other half. The other half had its reasons, and she was done performing for people's reasons. But the half that had chosen to be here was enough to fill the yard, and the circuit judge stood at the front with the particular gravity of a man who has officiated many weddings and knows the weight of each one. Eli was at the front. He had found a dark suit that fit him better than she expected, and his arm was out of the sling for the occasion, though she could see him holding it carefully. When she appeared walking across the yard, no one to give her away, walking alone, which was the only way that made sense, she watched his face. He did not perform the reaction. It simply moved across him like weather. "Who gives this woman to be married?" the judge asked. Silence. Then Walt stepped forward from the line of cowboys. "We all do," he said. He gestured at the men behind him, Cody on his crutch, Tim with his formal posture, Miguel with his hat held over his chest. "She saved Cody's life. She saved the boss's life. Far as we're concerned, she's family." He looked at the judge. "And family gives family away." The judge raised his eyebrows, then he nodded. Maggie walked the rest of the way alone. She took Eli's hands. "You look terrified," she said quietly. "I am." "Good, me too." "Good." The judge cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved." Maggie heard the words wash over her ancient, formal, worn smooth, with use more beautiful for being ordinary. She heard the silence between the words, the shared breath, the sound of Eli's hands warm and rough and steady around hers. "Do you, Eli James Hargrove, take this woman I do? Do you, Margaret Jane Calloway, take this man?" She looked into his amber eyes, saw the scars they carried together, his on his skin, hers in her history, and the loneliness that had lived in both of them for too long, and the love that had grown anyway despite everything, the way things grow through rock. "I do. Then by the power vested in me by the state of Texas, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." He cupped her face in his rough hands and kissed her. The cowboys made noise. The townspeople applauded. Somewhere improbably a fiddle started. When they finally stepped apart, Maggie was laughing. The party lasted until past midnight. Someone had a fiddle and someone else had a guitar, and a third person had a jug of something that didn't require naming, and the music was uneven and enthusiastic and right. Maggie danced until her feet ached with Eli, who was more graceful than she expected. With Walt, who was not graceful at all but committed. With Cody, who insisted despite the crutch and grinned throughout. With Owen Aldrich, who came because he'd been invited and apologized twice in 3 minutes and then forgot about apologizing and danced. When she finally sat down on a hay bale, breathless and happy, an old woman sat down beside her. She was small and bent with a face like worn leather and eyes that had seen too much and decided to keep seeing anyway. White-haired, 70 at least. "Mrs. Hargrove." Her voice was quiet almost under the music. Maggie turned. She didn't know her. "I don't think we've met," she said. "We haven't, but I knew your husband." She paused. "Your first one." Everything in Maggie went still. "I was the midwife here for 40 years, the old woman said. "Eleanor Patterson was my cousin. I'm the one who wrote the letter. She dictated it to me the winter before she died when she was too ill to write herself. She wanted me to send it. I was afraid." She looked at her hands in her lap. "I'm not afraid anymore. You've taken care of that." Maggie was quiet. "I wanted to tell you in person," the woman said. "The letter was the truth, all of it. Daniel came to see Eleanor because he was sure you were caring. He was so sure. He was terrified and hopeful in equal measure, the way young men are when they think they're about to become fathers and they don't know if they're ready." She paused. "He asked Eleanor if there was a way to be certain. She was going to tell him he was wrong, that there was no sign of it. But he left before she could. He was impatient. He was planning something." A pause. "He was planning to make things right before you found out, so you'd never have to worry." Maggie's throat was tight. "He was a good man," the woman said. "Foolish, young, too proud to ask for help when asking for help might have saved his life, but good in the ways that matter." She stood slowly with the careful deliberateness of old joints. "I'm sorry, child, for the silence, for the years of it." She looked at Maggie steadily. "He died running toward you. Don't let anyone tell you different." She walked away into the party. Maggie sat on the hay bale and looked at the ring on her finger, and at the new bunkhouse skeleton against the night sky, and at the man across the yard who was laughing at something Walt had said, laughing, the laugh she'd been hearing for the past week, the rusty, unpracticed real one. And she felt the thing that had been sitting in her chest for 3 years finally come loose. Not gone, not erased, but freed from the story it had been imprisoned in. He died for love. He died running toward me. I know that now. I'll know it always. She got up and went to find Eli. Later, much later, when the music had stopped and the guests had gone, and the cowboys had found places to sleep in the barn and the main house since the bunkhouse was still in the process of becoming. She told him about the old woman. They were on the porch. The stars were enormous overhead, the specific stars of Texas in late summer, bright and various and very close. He listened without interrupting, which was his way, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "He thought you were pregnant," he said. He was wrong, but he believed it, and the belief made him reckless, and the recklessness made him stupid in the particular way that love makes people stupid. She looked at the stars. "He didn't steal those horses to escape me. He stole them because he was terrified of failing me, and he couldn't see any other way." She paused. "I can't be angry at him anymore. I can only be glad and be glad and try to carry it gently." "Carry it gently," he said. "That's well put." She leaned into his good shoulder. He put his arm around her. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment, "about the store." "What about it?" "About what comes next, not just the mending and the merchandise, the future of it, what it could become." He paused. "Harlan's Crossing is going to be different starting from now. Ashford's network is going to unwind. The people he's been keeping under his thumb for 30 years are going to start making different choices." He turned his head to look at her. "You could be part of that. The store could be part of that, a place where people come not just for goods, but because it's safe and fair and run by someone they trust." "You're describing something I want," she said. "I know." He held her closer. "I've been paying attention." They sat in the starlight. "The baby question," she said quietly. He went very still. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. You've been honest with me about everything else." "Ask." "Do you want children?" He was quiet for a moment, not the evasive quiet of a man avoiding the question, but the careful quiet of a man who is going to answer it truly. "Yes," he said. "I wanted children for a long time and told myself I didn't, because wanting something and believing you deserve it are two different things, and I'd stopped believing I deserved much of anything." He looked at her. "I want to build something that doesn't end with me. I want to build something that keeps going. I want—" He stopped. "Is this something you want?" She turned to look at him directly. "Yes," she said. All of it. Everything." She touched his face. "We've both spent too long in the diminished version of ourselves. I'm done with that." He pulled her close and kissed her, and somewhere over the hill the cattle made their night sounds, and the creek talked on in the dark, and the stars didn't move, but felt closer. 1 year later, the store on Main Street of Harlan's Crossing had a new sign. Calloway and Hargrove General Goods. And the goods were better than they had been under Aldrich. The prices were fairer, and the woman behind the counter had the particular quality of someone who had been through enough to be unable to be impressed by difficulties. The bell above the door rang at 10:30 on a Thursday morning in October. Maggie looked up from the fabric bolts she'd been sorting. Eli came in with dust on his coat and hay in his hair, and the expression of a man who has just remembered he was supposed to be somewhere else 20 minutes ago. "You're late," she said. "The north fence?" He came around the counter and kissed her cheek. "How are you?" "Oh, tired. My back hurts. Your daughter has been using my ribs as a ladder since 6 this morning." She rubbed the side of her stomach. "She takes after her father. Stubbornness is her mother's contribution." He put his hand on her stomach. The baby kicked, prompt and emphatic, as though she'd been waiting for an audience. He smiled the full smile, the one that had taken her weeks to draw out of him. The first time, and now came easily, naturally, without the rust on it. "Strong," he said. "She'll need to be." She leaned against him briefly. "Did Walt finish the new stall in the barn?" "Almost. He's arguing with Cody about the angle." "He's always arguing with Cody about something." "Cody's always right. Walt hasn't caught on yet." The door opened. Clara Marsh came in with a list, and a smile waved at Maggie, started working through the shelves. She worked at the store 3 days a week, had for 6 months. It had turned out that Clara, without the weight of Vivian's approval to perform for, was competent and kind and unexpectedly funny. Maggie liked her. The morning continued. Customers came and went. Maggie moved more slowly now, working around the baby, but she had learned to adjust her habits without complaint. She had learned a lot of things about adjustment. 2 months later, the baby came. 12 hours of labor, the kind of long, grinding, serious work that made every other difficulty Maggie had faced in her life seem like preparation for this particular difficulty. She was not frightened, which surprised her because she had expected to be frightened. She was focused. She was in the territory. She knew the territory of necessary things that must be done regardless of how they feel, and she worked through it with the same quiet stubbornness she brought to everything else. At the end of it, a girl, small, loud, red-faced, with her fists clenched and her eyes shut against the indignity of arrival. The midwife said healthy and angry, which are both good signs, and Maggie laughed, which was the right response. Eli came in when the midwife opened the door for him. He crossed the room slowly, knelt beside the bed, looked at his daughter with the expression of a man confronting something much larger than he had expected, something that has broken through every wall at once and rendered all the careful engineering of his heart entirely irrelevant. He reached out one rough finger and touched her cheek. She stopped crying. Wide eyes gray-blue, Maggie's eyes opened and fixed on him with the focused, puzzled attention of someone who has just arrived somewhere and is not yet sure what to make of it. "Hello," he said quietly. "I'm your father." He touched her cheek again. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to be afraid. I'm going to make sure you always know that you are loved." He paused. "I'm going to tell you every day if I have to that the world doesn't get to decide your worth. You do." Maggie's eyes were wet. "What's her name?" the midwife asked. Maggie and Eli looked at each other. They had discussed it for months, had made lists, crossed things off, argued, affectionately suggested, and dismissed. But looking at her now, this specific, loud, opinionated, brand new, small person, there was only one name. "Hope," Maggie said. "Her name is Hope." Eli looked at his daughter. "Hope Hargrove," he said. He kissed her forehead. "Welcome to the world, sweetheart. We've been waiting for you." The sun was going down over the Hargrove Ranch on a Thursday evening in December, and Maggie sat on the main house porch with Hope asleep in her arms. The new bunkhouse was finished, and good better than the old one, Walt said, though he said it in the reluctant way of a man who believes in the original and will not easily concede that the replacement is superior even when it objectively is. The cattle were doing well. The store in town was busy. The land was the land, and it was theirs, and somewhere under the hills the Geological Survey was being reviewed now properly by someone who was going to tell them what was actually there. Something might be valuable, or it might be nothing. Either way, it didn't change the value of the land itself, which was considerable. Eli sat beside her. His scarred arm was around her shoulders, warm and solid. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "The day we met." She looked at the hills. "I walked into that store planning to buy thread and walk out again. I was going to be invisible. I'd been practicing invisibility for 3 years. You weren't invisible. You were the only one who noticed." "I noticed things?" His mouth curved. "I noticed you were the most real person in the room." She looked at the ring on her finger. The gold had worn to a smooth sheen over the year of wearing, and the blue stone caught the last of the daylight. "I'm glad I didn't give up," she said. 3 years ago, I stood by the creek and thought about giving up, about whether it was worth continuing to be here." She felt him tense slightly and kept talking. "I decided to be stubborn. Spite mostly, I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. But stubbornness got me to a Tuesday in August, and Tuesday in August got me to you." "You saved yourself," he said. "I just gave you a place to do it." "You gave me more than that." "What?" She looked up at the first star appearing over the eastern ridge. "Hope," she said. "That's what you gave me." For she was a name, just the thing itself, the possibility of forward. He pulled her closer. In her arms, Hope stirred, made the small, wordless sounds of someone surfacing from a very good dream, and then settled again. The stars came out over the Texas hills one by one, and then all at once, the way stars do. The road to this evening had been long and brutal and full of fire, but they had walked it separately first and then together. And the walking had made them exactly who they needed to be to arrive here at this porch, at this evening, at this life. In the end, Harlan's Crossing learned what the cursed widow had always known, that a curse is just a story someone tells about you when they're afraid of what you are. And a story can be rewritten. A story can be burned down to the ground and rebuilt better, and the people who set the fire will sometimes stand and watch it rise and understand too late what they were actually afraid of. Not the curse, the woman who wouldn't let it stop her. Maggie Hargrove held her daughter and felt her husband's heartbeat through the arm that bore the map of his old fire, and she smiled. She wasn't cursed. She was home. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story moved you, if you've ever had to keep walking when the rocks were flying, if you've ever built something back from nothing, if you've ever found that stubbornness was the only prayer that actually got answered, then this story was for you. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment telling me which city you are watching from and which moment in this story hit you hardest. I want to know how far hope travels. See you in the next one.